Once again, I want to thank you. Thank you for being here, and thank Preston Wood for the opportunity for me to be here and to share these thoughts with you. I'm learning that the classes go better when I talk a little bit less and you talk a little bit more. And so I want to, from the beginning here, invite you to jump in and join in and raise your hand and interrupt me if you need to. We've talked previously in previous lessons about the human brain, and I just love the way this is written by Matthew in Matthew 22 verses 37 through 40. When Jesus says, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind." With all your mind. He created us with minds, with brains that are above those of the other creatures He created, the other animals. This is the first and great commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. And so the very first lesson we looked at in here is about the amazing human brain. The human being is the masterpiece of God's creation. The human brain is the masterpiece of the masterpiece. And He's created us for connection with each other. We talked about self-understanding, how the better we understand ourselves, then the more we're going to bring to our relationships. And in John 13, Jesus rose while they were having supper, the Last Supper, in the very shadow of the cross. And He grabbed a basin and a towel, and He knelt and washed the disciples' feet. What that verse, the passage says, Jesus knew who He was. He knew He had come from God. He knew He was going to God, and He knew what His purpose on the earth was. That self-understanding gave him the ability to humble Himself and to act on that occasion as a servant. We talked about God's plan for the family, and we've talked about our chemistry and how our chemistry has so much to do with who we are, but it doesn't override our abilities to make decisions. We're going to extend that theme tonight in talking about what are some of the factors that contribute to our coming together in relationships, and what are some of the factors that contribute to our staying together in relationships. So we're going to start off talking about attraction and flirting and emotional neediness. I'm going to hopefully all this will make sense to you as we go along. But I want to tell you about two types of clients who I and most counselors will see on a fairly regular basis. So one is a guy. Let's say he's 35 or 40 years old. He's been married for 10 or 15 years, has a wife and children, and he comes into my office and he says, "You know, I don't know if I love my wife anymore," or "I don't think I love my wife anymore." And then he might add, "You know, I'm not sure I've ever really loved her." And so at that point, I will usually say something like, "Well, why don't you just go ahead and tell me the name of the person that you're involved with, so we can call her by first name." See? And he will sometimes act shocked and say, "Well, I didn't tell you I was involved with somebody else." And I will say, "Yeah, you know what? You really did. You really did. You didn't know he was telling me." But when a guy says something like that, "I don't think I love my wife anymore. In fact, I'm not sure I've ever really loved her," it is it's almost verbatim what another guy will say when he comes in. Now, a woman who comes in my office and she's 20, she's 35 or 40 years old and she's been married for 15 or 20 years, she's usually a little bit more direct and a little bit more open about it. And she'll say something like, I don't know, I really don't know how it happened. I don't know when it happened. It just happened. It was not intentional. We didn't mean for anything to happen. It just happened. And so what I'll usually say then is, well, let's kind of figure out what happened, because things don't just happen. I want to know what happened and how she responded to what happened. So it's a very simple thing. You've got it there on your outline. The note says, I like you, do you like me? Yes, no, or maybe. So how many of you have ever written or received a note like that? Yeah, me too. Now, recently? I hope not. maybe not recently. Mine was in the first grade, so I think the statute of limitations has passed on that. But my point in putting this up here is it's the perfect flirting question. I want you to know how I feel about you. I want to know how you feel about me. And the key here is, if you like me, like I like you, if you like me, that's going to help me feel better about me. Right? But I don't want to back you into a corner. No pressure. Also, I don't want a negative response, because that would make me feel bad. So I'll leave you a little wiggle room there and put the maybe thing in there. So I like you. Do you like me? My point is that this is the kind of thing that happens every day. And you know it, and I know it. It happens in the workplace. Now, the note doesn't get written out usually, per se. It happens at work, it happens in restaurants, it happens in bars, it happens in schools, it happens in neighborhoods, it happens in conferences. And yes, I will even say it happens in church sometimes. It's where somebody looks at another person, a person that they are not attached to or not married to, and they send these signals, and sometimes the signals are reciprocated. So what we're really talking about here is Attraction 101. No, I'm sorry. I used to call it Attraction 101, but then I upgraded my PowerPoint. It's Attraction 1.0 now. So, yeah, I say I didn't upgrade my brain, but it's there on my PowerPoint. So people all the time will say, I can't tell you what attracted me to him or to her. The point that I want you to get from this section of the lesson is that everybody, I believe this is true, everybody, male and female, there are certain characteristics in other people that we find attractive. Men are not attracted to the entirety of the female gender, but there are certain characteristics that men and women are attracted to in other people. But we have to understand that's really what it is. That's all it is. It's attraction. But it may have something to do with a person's looks, a person's face, a person's build, a person's height, a person's sense of humor, a person's self-confidence, the way they carry themselves. There are a lot of different variables that can fit into that. Let me share with you a story that I heard on tape many years ago, probably 20 or 25 years ago. But this again was told by Harville Hendricks. I've mentioned him before. But he was talking about when they lived in New York City. And he was doing some Christmas shopping, one of the big department stores in New York City. And he tells this about himself. He was riding the escalator down from one floor to the next, and out in front of him was the entire floor that he was going down to, and it was just a sea of people, hundreds of people on that floor. It's Christmas shopping in New York. And he says, I don't know how this happened, but somehow my eyes locked with a lady who was behind. She was standing at a counter, and she was purchasing something from the clerk. And he says it was really an amazing phenomenon, but our eyes met, they locked on each other, and I couldn't take my eyes off her, and she couldn't take her eyes off me. And so he got to the bottom of the escalator and kind of stumbled as he got off, and he said, he went on and finished his shopping. It says that when he's told the story before, that somebody might ask, well, did you go meet her? And he said, oh, why would I meet her? And they said, because of the strength of that attraction. He said, here's the deal. First of all, I'm a happily married man. I'm not looking to be in any kind of relationship with any other person, any other woman, but it was a very real and a very powerful force. I gathered my balance at the bottom of the escalator and I walked away and continued my shopping. And I really like that. I like that example. I've shared that with clients many times over the years. The point of that story is that kind of experience happens. It's a benign experience as long as we recognize it for what it is. It's a natural, mutual, very powerful attraction. But we get into trouble if we start misinterpreting that. If we tap into the myths and misconceptions that we talked about previously in this class, if we, for example, have that experience with somebody where we just lock eyes with each other and don't know what's going on, if we interpret that as love at first sight, then we're really in trouble. If we interpret that as falling in love, yeah, more trouble. I must have met my other half, the right person, and with them I will live happily ever after. Well, no, none of those things are true. Those are myths and misconceptions. Those are romantic notions. Kind of fun to think about those things, but when we misinterpret that attraction, we are headed for some real bad experiences. So we want to remember that attraction is a fact of life, but it must be interpreted accurately. So now, of course, these principles are going to be different if a person is single and not in a committed relationship. But we're talking about people who are in married, committed relationships experiencing this kind of thing and misinterpreting those. Okay, so I told you I was going to let you talk. My mouth is dry now, so I'm going to take another swig of water. Any reactions, any thoughts about what we're talking about so far?
I think it's like with any temptation, you can't necessarily control what you see or what you hear, but dwelling on it or pursuing
That's
it, you
it.
can control.
Yeah, precisely. And we've said this kind of from the beginning in this class, you really can't control what comes into your mind as you are going home today or even at home, and you may see billboards or TV advertisements or whatever you are exposed to. You can't really control what comes into your mind, but all of us can control what stays on our mind and what we pursue and what we dwell on. And as long as we are dwelling on how unhappy I am in my marriage and what all the faults that my wife has, and that girl that I was just attracted to, wow, she looks like she doesn't have any of those faults, right? So as long as we dwell on negativity in our own lives and our own relationships, then we are going to be really vulnerable to that kind of thing and to misinterpreting that kind of thing. Other thoughts?
That it's one thing to look at the menu, it's another thing to order.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You can, well, and sometimes looking will get you in trouble. Okay, just saying. But attraction, and one of the myths we talked about, maybe this was last week, was that if I'm in a fully satisfying relationship, I won't be attracted to anybody else. No, that's a myth. Attraction is one thing that is pretty normal, but it's what you do with it. It's what you decide to do. I decide to love the Lord with all my mind and I'm not going to let my mind get out of control there. So there are 2 or 3 principles of attraction that I think are very important. One of those is that we're usually attracted to people who we know are attracted to us. So we may be, again, in a workplace or in any other environment, and if someone comes on as if they are really attracted to us, then all of a sudden they become more attractive to me too. I love the story about the little boy, the first grade boy who came home from school. And his mom was asking him, what happened in school, and he said, well, I have a girlfriend. And she says, oh, wow, that's neat. What does she like about you? And he said, she thinks I'm cute and smart and funny. And the mom said, that's really neat. What do you like about her? And he said, she thinks I'm cute and smart and funny, right? Yeah, those are very likable traits when somebody finds us attractive. Of course, a flower grows in the direction of the sun and the warmth, and we are usually attracted to people who we know are attracted to us. A second principle of attraction is we are attracted to people who think we'll fill an emotional void within us. And we talked about that a little bit earlier in the series. That's one of the myths and misconceptions, that I know I'm lonely now, but if I attach myself and get married to this other person, I won't be lonely anymore. Right? That's one of the myths and misconceptions. Do you know anybody who's married and lonely? Oh, yeah. I know I'm depressed now, but if I get married to this other person, I'll never be depressed again. So we have unrealistic expectations of marriage, that marriage or that other person is going to fulfill all of the emotional voids within us. The problem is that other person is probably thinking the same thing about us. Not only are we thinking they're going to meet our emotional needs, they are thinking, I'm going to meet their emotional needs. And so, back to lesson 2 in the series, we come back to self-understanding. It's really vitally important. As much as we are capable of understanding ourselves and understanding what is missing. So the man or the woman who I talked about earlier in the introduction, they have gotten involved with somebody outside of their marriage. What I want to do with them, the work that I want them to do in my office, is to figure out what's been missing. Not just what's been missing in the marriage, but what's been missing in them individually. And so when we find out, we figure out what I am missing. So am I missing self-confidence and personal self-esteem or excitement or hope for the future? And I find somebody who thinks I'm cute and smart and funny, right? Wow, that's a pretty heady experience. But so I need to figure out what's missing within me, what's missing within my marriage, and so we can go about finding what's missing in a healthy rather than an unhealthy way. So what is attraction? What is attraction? It's a matter of taste, and attraction in the eye of the beholder, personal preference, yeah, but partly, but much more. I want to show you the cover of a DVD produced by the Discovery Channel a few years ago, 2009, I think, and this is called The Science of Sex Appeal. And it's a really fascinating study of all the characteristics that are involved in attraction. Now, this is not a faith-based video, and so there's nothing in there about what God says and about what God's plan for our marriages is. But I think it's important. It's important to understand this stuff, because these are some factors that we're all biological people. Don't misunderstand. God created us with the capacity for attraction. Absolutely. That's how we are built. But He also created us to be above the other animals. He created us in His own image. And so, as we've already talked about, He expects us to rise above ordinary attractions, ordinary influences, instincts. Although much of the time we don't. Human beings act like animals much of the time. But this is a very interesting video because it kind of points out some of the principles of attraction. It's a very complex phenomenon, a combination of many factors that are biological and chemical and genetic. And we are all of these things. We are biological and chemical and genetic beings, but we're also spiritual beings, and the spiritual side of us overrides. We're designed so that it will override everything else that goes on. Many of these factors we are not even aware of, or of which we are not even aware, to put it grammatically correct. So when you're in a crowd of people, let's say you're in a crowd of 100 people, you're going to be attracted to certain people, not attracted to other people, and some of these levels of attraction are things that you are not even aware of happening. Check my time. Yeah, I'll go ahead and tell you this example. It's psychologists have studied herds of animals for years, and so these people will set up a viewing place to view animals that gather in herds, deer and elk and so forth, and they will be filming and they'll be taking notes. And so let's say we've got a herd of 15 or 20 deer there. What they will identify is who are the deer attracted to? What kind of females are the males attracted to? What kind of males are the females attracted to? And just from a purely biologic, propagation of the species point of view, they have found that the males are usually attracted to females who are younger and who appear to be healthier. All right? Makes sense? If we're going to reproduce, then she has probably a better chance of producing a healthy offspring that will live to adulthood. The female is usually attracted to males who are larger in stature, physical stature, and higher in status in the herd. Right? For the same reasons. If we're going to reproduce, she wants to be with a male who will be able to provide for and protect the offspring. Again, giving the offspring the best chances of survival. So anyway, when I'm teaching my class, I'll make a snide remark. Say, aren't we glad that it's only females who are attracted in those ways, and that human beings are far, far above those? And there usually are a couple of women in the class who have been left by their husbands for a younger female or whatever. So anyway, it's not all that funny. But it's interesting that humans do, can have some of the same attractions, that from a purely biological perspective, everything is directed at passing on the best genes. But what we find in humans is that there are specific cues of attraction. And again, this is part of the self-understanding thing. Some people are attracted to certain facial cues, the eyes, the nose, the mouth, the symmetry of the face, the skin, all of those things. So, and these are things when you meet somebody, you're not going to be, probably not going to be aware of that, but these are factors in attraction. The body, the proportionality of the body movement and so forth, the voice, A lower pitch of voice in men is perceived as more masculine. A higher pitch in women is perceived as more feminine. Status really does have something to do with attraction. And so in this video that I showed you the cover of a minute ago, they had an experiment. They showed these pictures of 10 guys to younger women and rate them 1 to 10 as far as attractiveness is concerned. And so they all did that. They went back and took the same pictures, and then they put their profession and their annual income at the bottom of the page. And the guy who was ranked like number 2 or 3 in attraction, when he was given a $350,000 a year income, his attractiveness shot way, way up. He became a lot more attractive. And that doesn't mean that women are only interested in money. Okay, I don't want you to misread any of that. But what it does mean is that we're still kind of influenced by some of these factors that we're talking about here. One more has to do with scent. Really interesting, interesting study. They put T-shirts on guys who were on a treadmill and let them work up a little bit of a sweat. Took the T-shirts and put them in plastic bags, and I don't know if they made the women smell the T-shirt or they allowed them to smell the T-shirts, but there were certain scents that were very attractive to certain women and not so much so to others. Anyway, point of all this is that attraction is a multi-variable thing, and the less we know about ourselves, then the more susceptible we are to falling into those kinds of traps. So, just very quickly here, there are warning signs that if you are in, and I've got that, but I don't have these identified on your outline. The warning signs that if you are in a committed, exclusive relationship, and that your relationship may be in trouble. You may be in trouble if some of these things happen. If you have a special confidant, a special person at the office or somewhere else in your life who is receptive to your feelings and fears, you don't think you can discuss these with your husband or your wife, but you can discuss these feelings and these fears with somebody else, that's a really, really big red flag. A second is if you share personal information and negative feelings about your primary relationship with a special friend. If you meet the friend of the opposite sex for dinner, go back to his or her place and discuss your relationship. The lunches take a little bit longer than necessary, or dinners, then these are all big red warning flags. If you have a tendency to humiliate your partner in front of others, suggesting that he or she doesn't quite measure up, is a loser or inadequate in some way, big, huge red flag. Or if you come up with somebody who's an old boyfriend or girlfriend, we used to say around the office that high school and college reunions mean that our phones are going to start ringing. Now, I just went to my 50th high school reunion, and luckily, thankfully, my wife was with me, and I didn't feel anything about any of. There were a couple of old girlfriends there, but they haven't aged very well, not like I have. See? But thankfully, maybe at 50 years post high school, we've gotten over some of those things. But I think the 20-year reunions, maybe the 30-year reunions, you've been out of school long enough, you've gotten married, maybe you're not happy in your marriage, and something about that, you meet up with somebody you haven't seen, haven't talked to in 20 years. And you kind of flash back to that was really fun when we were in high school. That was a good relationship. I bet we could pick up right here where we left off, and everything's going to be good. No, everything's not going to be good. That's another one of those myths that we tell ourselves. Another warning sign that I didn't have room to put up here is that if you keep secret, password-protected email accounts, internet accounts, then that's just really not a good idea, and it's really a dangerous thing. These are warning signs that hopefully you will take very, very seriously. I'm going to pause before we go into our next section here, and again, ask any thoughts on what we've been talking about so far. I don't expect any confessions from anybody here, you know. Okay.
Do you give discounts on group sessions?
that's yeah. We can meet right after class here. Again, God has created us with a mind. He's created us with the ability to think, with the ability to see the warning signs. We talked about chemistry last week and how that a lot of our chemistry that happens in our brains gives us signals that everything's going to be okay, even when everything's not going to be okay. So we got to recognize what's going on inside our bodies too.
Well, actually,
Go ahead.
Even though it's not really related to marriage, but it's interesting when you discuss attraction, how people get like cult personality, how that people can be drawn to many of the same influences into cults or leaders of some sort.
Yeah.
And receive the same kind of way.
Now I think that's a good call. Somebody's very charismatic leader, very compelling, very persuasive. That person can be very attractive. We think that they are that we're going to live happily ever after in that kind of situation as well. Over the years, yes.
I was going to say, I don't know if you mentioned this, but about the person who is like the rescuer and is attracted to needy people. I can help them.
That's exactly right. I hadn't mentioned that, but that's another form of attraction. If I am a kind of a caretaker, rescuer, enabler type of person, I'm going to be initially attracted to that person who is needy, who needs to be rescued, and that can not be good for either one of us. If I'm a controlling person, I may be attracted to a person who can be controlled, who is easily controlled. If I don't really know, if I'm kind of floating along through life and don't really know the direction that I want to go, I may be attracted to someone who is very controlling, who says, well, I'll tell you how to live your life. I'll show you what you need to do and where you need to go and how you need to dress and where you need to work and things like so. And it's a real good point. Thanks for bringing that up. That those personality and temperamental traits also have a role in attraction. And it just also reminds me of the introverts and extroverts we talked about. I guess this was last week. That E's are oftentimes attracted to I's and vice versa. And thinking people are often attracted to feeling people, and feeling people for thinking people, and that kind of thing. Other thoughts?
How about like the bad boy syndrome,
Yeah, the bad boy syndrome.
women are attracted to.
I had a guy just yesterday in my office. He said, I try to be a decent person. This is a single guy. I try to be a decent person, but all women, none of them want somebody who is decent. And it really does seem that way, attracted to the the bad boy thing, that always reminds me of a Seinfeld episode when, George was playing the bad boy, and of course this cute little blonde girl was falling all over herself to impress him. I really don't know what that's about. Except to say that I told you that one of the classes I teach at SMU is family of origin. Those needs are born somewhere in our growing up years. I don't believe those are we're genetically predisposed, but there's something about that kind of attraction. People are attracted to dangerous people would be the same kind of thing that you're asking about. I know it happens. Not quite sure how it happens or why it happens that way.
Well, wouldn't it be based on the premise that a woman, if she wants to be all in, wants an all-in guy, and vice versa? I mean, those are pretty recognizable characteristics.
Mm-hmm.
Not verbally speaking, but perhaps how a person walks, or especially if they're in a bar or something like that.
Yeah.
Those are really dangerous liaisons.
Yeah, they are.
Can be.
Well, they can be. You can't say that a good relationship can't start that way, but there's so many things we don't know about each other when we first meet, and so it's a very complex set of circumstances.
On the warning signs.
Yes.
One of the last ones you said that if you're having too long of a lunch or too long of a dinner with someone of the opposite sex, is it really ever a good idea to do that period having lunch, just the two of y'all by yourselves? And to me, that strikes me as a bad idea. Just do
Yeah.
it.
I've got a video where the video's about sexual harassment in the workplace, and there's a really sharp attorney who they are asking questions, and his whole theme throughout that, and this again does not have any spiritual connotations, but they're asking him, is it sexual harassment if a guy has a Playboy magazine on his desk? Is it sexual harassment to kiss the female co-worker under the mistletoe at Christmas? And his theme comes back and he says, avoid risky situations. Three little words, and anything that could be risky, and I think you're right, that could be. I think there are times when male and female co-workers can have a business lunch and keep it strictly business, but it also opens up the possibilities of other things. And you're not going to go wrong, and the Bible talks about avoiding the very appearance of evil. But the attorney would say it, avoid risky situations. So that's going to be the safe side of the street, to stay as far away from the edge of the road as possible.
Bring in an extra coworker or two.
Oh yeah. That's usually a real good idea. So for years, what psychologists have studied troubled families. They've studied troubled individuals and troubled families. But 20 or 25 years ago, there were 2 or 3 university groups that decided, what we're going to do is we're going to find some families that seem to be working pretty well with each other. And they seem to be getting along well, they seem to be communicating well, they seem to love each other. Let's identify these families, let's give them some questionnaires, and let's see if we can figure out what they're doing right that the rest of us can learn from. And so what these studies have come up with are 8 to 10 kind of characteristics of healthy families. Now, if you didn't see that on your page, and I was going to ask you to write down some of the characteristics the healthy families have in common with each other, you would probably write these down. You'd probably get most, if not all of them. But I'll have a little bit to say about each of these. One of these characteristics is trust. They trust each other. And for those of you who know a little bit about human growth and development, you'll know that trust is one of the earliest lessons that all of us learn in our infancy, really, within the first couple of years of life. Depends on how you're treated and how I'm treated in the families that we grew up in. So if our needs were met relatively well and relatively consistently, then we grew up believing that, yeah, this is a good place. I can trust these people who are taking care of me. When I cry, they give me what I need, whether it's food or changing or whatever I need at the time. That helps a child develop trust. But a child who does not grow up in that environment is going to have a more difficulty trusting, even as he or she gets older and gets into adolescence and adulthood. In trust, there are two necessary elements, and it's very simple. This is not complicated at all. I need to behave in a way that is absolutely trustworthy. I need to be where I say I'm going to be doing what I say I'm going to be doing, be with who I say I'm going to be with. The other element is on the other partner. The partner has to be willing to trust. And that involves some risk, especially if the partner is not, that if trust doesn't come very easily or naturally to him or her. So one person, actually both people, need to be trustworthy, and both people need to be willing to trust the other person. One of the keys of this element is that trust is learned. Trust is a learned factor, but so is mistrust. We learn mistrust when we are betrayed, or when we're treated poorly, or we're abandoned, or whatever the case may be. One of the things to note about each of these, it's down at the bottom of your outline, is that each one of these characteristics is not an emotion, but a decision. All right? So unless I forget to say it later on, the things that bring people together in the first place, attraction characteristics, are frequently based upon emotion. How I feel about the other person, how I feel about me when I'm with the other person. Feelings oftentimes bring people together. That's not what keeps people together. Decisions, cognitive decisions, are what keep people together. We don't feel trust, we decide to trust. Honesty is the second characteristic. Again, there are two important aspects of honesty. Of course, trust is built upon honesty, but one of these is telling the truth, and the other is being open with the truth. That is, not hiding anything. So, I mean, it happened today in my office. There was a guy in my office, and he's talking about his relationship with his girlfriend, and he says, "Yes, I'm very truthful with her. Now, I don't tell her everything." I said, "Okay, we may want to talk about that later on. But what is it that you're not telling, and why are you not telling it?" An example of that would be, she comes in and he seems to be kind of moody or down, and she says, "Are you all right?" And he says, Yeah, I'm fine." Well, he knows he's not fine. She knows he's not fine. But for whatever reasons, he's not ready to open up at that moment, and hopefully he will be later on. So there are a lot of ways you can be truthful but not be really open with the truth. So openness means we really need to talk about what's going on in our relationship and not deny and not hide. Honesty means we're going to talk about it at some point. A third characteristic is commitment. Again, one mistake that sometimes people make is they consider commitment to be a feeling or emotion. No, you decide to commit. Commitment is a cognitive decision. You don't feel committed, you decide to commit, and thus commitment is something we can control. Each of these is eminently controllable because they are decisions. They are decisions we make with the mind that God made us. So what is commitment? Commitment is a promise. It's a promise that problems will be discussed, that we will invest the time and energy and the spirit necessary, that we are on the same team. That we're not identical, but one example I love about that being on the same team is that if one person is playing a piano and the other person is playing a violin, for example, we can make beautiful music together as long as we're playing the same piece at the same tempo and the same tune. We're not identical. We're playing different instruments, but we are making the same music with each other. So commitment is the promise that this is my friend, my spouse, my lover, my family. I will do, this is where the commitment comes from. I decide I will do whatever is within my power to nurture and to be faithful to this relationship. I will. Doesn't mean I'm going to be perfect, doesn't mean I won't make mistakes. But commitment is the promise to work and to reevaluate, to revise, and to stay. I'm going to go through the rest of these and give us a little bit more time for discussion. Another characteristic of healthy relationships is they spend time together. And I know what the world is like now. And I know this may be more of a challenge today than perhaps has ever been in our history, the history of our culture. There are so many things competing for our time, and good things. These are not necessarily bad things, but there are good things for all of us to be involved with. But it means the margins of our lives can get smaller and smaller, can shrink. Healthy families have made the commitment to spend time together. Time doing what? It really doesn't matter. Almost anything. Maybe it's working together. I grew up on a farm, and Dad would sometimes have all of us out there working the farm, either with cattle or bringing in logs for the fireplace. We had a wood-burning fireplace, and my sister didn't oftentimes enjoy that. She thought she might have been a little bit above manual labor, but Dad and Mom convinced her that was not the case, that she needs to grab a couple of sticks of wood and bring them in just like everybody else does. But that's time together, working, playing, common activities, eating meals together can be a really, really bonding period of time if we know how to do that. The point is, it's not important what they do, but they do it together. And again, I don't know if this is still a discussion. It was when I was younger, where somebody would say, now I don't spend a lot of quantity of time with my children, but boy, the quality of the time I spend with them is really, really good. And I'm just encourage you, don't get caught up in that quality versus quantity time thing, because there's no substitute for either one. Both of those are extremely important. And I remember, maybe you can remember this from your growing up years, there were times in my family when we were just kind of hanging out, and maybe we were watching TV together, or maybe we were sitting around the table playing a board game or putting a puzzle together or something, and somebody would say something that would just completely crack everybody up. Okay? And it wasn't planned, it wasn't scripted, it could not have been scripted. But it wouldn't have happened, and we can still get together today and laugh about it. Do you remember when, because it was just funny, it would not have happened were we not just spending time together. And sometimes those spontaneous kind of things are even the most fun at all. And families that work together, we also spend time apart. That has to do with individuality and a sense of self. Usually it's not all that great to just be totally enmeshed with each other 24/7. Insecure people sometimes want or need that. but that can create a smothering kind of situation or a dependency kind of thing. They spend time nurturing the relationship, which simply means taking care of ourselves and giving care to the other person. What I want to emphasize here is nurturing the relationship is something that happens every single day, or something that doesn't happen every single day of the week. And so when I counsel with couples in my office, I talk about daily expressions of appreciation, daily expressions of gratitude. Doesn't have to be anything big and tumultuous, but I think I mentioned this before. I appreciate my wife for unloading the dishwasher. I don't like to unload the dishwasher. I don't mind putting dishes in the dishwasher. I can unload the dishwasher, but I appreciate her and she appreciates me. And when we are in a good pattern of expressing those daily appreciations, then we are making daily decisions. All right, and I share this with people who are thinking about leaving their spouse for somebody else or flirting with somebody else. You know what? You make a decision every single day when you wake up and get out of bed. You may not realize you're making that decision, but you make a decision whether to be faithful to your spouse or not. Whether you're going to be devoted and committed and trustworthy in this relationship or not. Those decisions are made daily. A couple of other things. Couples that are working or families that work well together have an awareness. Their eyes are wide open. They're living in reality and not fantasy. They don't wish that he or she could be somebody else other than who they are. Their expectations and wants and their needs are fact-based and not fantasy-based. And couples that are working well with each other cope with crisis. They are not in denial. They are not without problems, but they have a determination to meet and to manage what comes their way. Okay, let me edit a couple of things here. As I mentioned before, what healthy families have in common, each of these characteristics is based upon cognition, not emotion. These are decisions that we make every day. And the Matthew 22, 36 through 40 passage that I read earlier has to do with the importance of using our mind, the mind that God gave us. Yes, He also created us with the capacity to be attracted to other people, but He gave us the mind to manage those attractions. Okay, again, I'm going to slow down right here and pause, and haven't given you much of an opportunity to jump in, but we've got a few minutes left, so jump in, please.
Trust seems to just be the cornerstone, I think, to the whole healthy family argument, because once you have trust, then kind of everything almost seems to waterfall from it.
Yeah, I'll add a couple of points to that. When a couple comes to my office, and I believe that there are 3 or 4 peers that support the house, the relationship house. Trust is one of those, and we've talked about safety. Safety is born out of trust. If I feel safe with my spouse, then I trust her. A third, though, is equally important, I think, is respect. I think you can trust someone but not respect them. And respect is just as important, I believe, as the other two. Another has to do with power. Who has the power in the relationship, and how is that power utilized? And so from the very beginning, I always look for and ask questions about those. So I mentioned earlier in the series the difference between triggers and issues. Do you remember that? Does anybody? I think we talked about it. And so people will come into the office because they've got, money is a trigger, or sex is a trigger, or children are a trigger, or household responsibilities. There are a lot of different things that can trigger conflict in a relationship. But almost all of those filter down to trust, to safety, to respect, and to power.
What do you mean by power?
Power means, let me see if I can come up with a, it's not as simple as saying who's in control. That's a part of it, but that's an oversimplification, because in different aspects of the relationship, different partners can have different levels of power or control. The way that God made us and the way that God made our relationships, yes, the husband is the head of the household, and he is the one who steers the ship. But that doesn't mean that nobody else in the family, and especially the spouse, doesn't mean that they don't have any power. She may have some expertise in areas that he doesn't at all. So if he is a wise head of the household, he will not latch on to that power and with an iron fist. He will not rule with an iron fist. And so, how do we address conflicts? How do we address the direction that our life is going to take? Then, ideally, I think everybody, but especially the two adults in the family, are both going to have some say in that. Does that help, or am I just
I just didn't. I
muddying
understand
the water?
Trust, let me see. What you say? Trust. I understand the trust, the safety, the respect. I just didn't understand how that power came into play with the trust, the safety, and respect. Does that make sense?
In my experience, personal experience and professional experience, it's more a matter of how the power is exercised. And so I know what God wants for us. I think I know what God wants for us. But I also know that I've seen people in my office, and here's a guy who's very much a Bible-believing guy, and he's got his Bible in his hand, and he's holding that in her face, and he says, this book tells you that you should obey me. I don't believe that's the exercise of power that God has in mind in Ephesians 5 and the other verses that we've looked at before. I think can be an abuse of power. And it says something about him, and it says something about her if he feels like he has to exercise his power in that way. So maybe somebody can help me out. I'm kind of struggling with this a little bit. Ken?
Just in my situation, I wouldn't phrase it as power, and I think you hit it on at the very end there. Because, again, learning from mistakes. I've learned that both partners have power, whether it be equal in one aspect of life and not another, is not the point. The point is whoever has that power to not abuse it. To me, that's I'd phrase it as avoid abuse of power rather than power.
Yeah. That makes sense to me, Ken. Thank you for that. Anybody else?
It would seem like, sort of like what you say, that like God has power. Therefore, he has abilities that he may or may not choose to exercise at any particular given time. But never doubt, although we do seem to doubt, that His power is totally beyond our comprehension. So we have a tendency to dismiss it. But power, to me, would be something similar to, I have the ability, but whether I choose to exercise that power or not is a different issue.
Yeah. And people say, well, when it comes down to a husband and wife making a decision and they both feel strongly about that decision, then, who has the tiebreaker? Well, it may be a good question. In my experience, that doesn't happen very often. It does happen sometimes. I do believe that the way that God set up the family, with the husband as the head of the family, kind of answers that question. But the assumption there too, from those same passages, that the husband's going to love his wife as Christ loved the church. And if I love her as Christ loved the church, I'm not going to want to overpower her. I'm not going to abuse my power, because abusing my power may also be abusing her. And so that the whole thing is I think people sometimes, we want to make a template that works in every situation. I don't believe that's what Ephesians 5 is designed to do, and I don't think it works very well. But when we do have a power struggle, how well are we able to talk about it? Can we sit down lovingly and respectfully with each other and talk, what are the real issues here? And why do I feel the way I feel, and why do you feel the way you feel? And can we find a way where we can help things along, help us move along beyond this point of stuckness? And I think most of the time, if not all the time, there are ways to, you talk about as Christ loved the church. Yeah, God has all power, but He is very restrained in His use of power. Jesus, how did He teach? He didn't try to browbeat people into believing what he was teaching. He told stories. He let people kind of come to those conclusions on their own. He told parables. And which of the men was a neighbor to the Samaritan who had been beaten and left on the side of the road? Well, the answer is obvious. And so that's some of the most persuasive conversation, or some of the most persuasive things we can use in our conversations, is to just kind of help the other person see our side, and we try to help see their side of when there is an argument or a discussion where lines are fairly easily drawn. Thank you again. I've kept you a little bit over, but I started a little bit late, so I appreciate your being here. Remember, no class will meet here next week. All classes will meet in the worship center, and we'll come back for the last two lessons. Which I know the last one is on safe conversations. I think the next to the last one is on communication and how to communicate. Some of the steps of communicating safely with each other. And at the bottom of your outline there, our webmaster Donnie Claxton is not here tonight because he had some very complicated abdominal surgery on Monday, and he is still in the hospital. But on our website, PrestonPlaceCounseling.com, are I think the only two videos that are up there, the first two classes. I've got him the second two, but he hasn't had the opportunity to post them. But that will be done pretty soon, I'm sure. So let's pray briefly, please. Father, thank you again for bringing us here safely and for giving us the opportunities to be in relationships that you do. Thank you for giving us our minds, and help us to utilize our minds for your glory and for the benefit of our our marriages and our families, and help us to avoid anything that even remotely strikes us as dangerous or red flags. Help us to be true and faithful, to be trustworthy and honest and committed in everything that we do. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you all again.